Hi guys, today I'm going to record an introductory video for a playlist which is going to take you through some of the concepts of the 12 steps. There's a limit to what you can do on a video, but my goal will be to make it accessible to people who perhaps previously thought that the 12 steps were not for them, that it wasn't possible for them to get any benefit from it. As I did years ago. So if you watched the introductory video to the Frank Truth YouTube channel, you would have learned that I've worked in rehab almost 15 years, and one of the things I've noticed is that I tend to learn a lot in working with others. There'll be a concept or a difficult thing to explain, and then I'll find a way of putting it which is quite simple, and then I can see when people get that. So that teaches me. I often think, wow, that was quite cool. Where did I hear that? And it's just me trying to simplify and work with others and getting that concept across. So after 15 years of doing this, I think I can simplify things for people quite easily, and that's unbelievably helpful if somebody is saying, nope, the 12 steps are not for me. And I'd like to give you the example. So there was a chap that was coming into rehab, and he was stood outside the front of the centre, very uncomfortable, smoking a cigarette, just totally anxious. So I went up to this chap and welcomed him in and said, you know, do you realise we're a 12-step rehab? And he said, yeah. But he didn't seem too happy about that. And I said, okay, so have you had any experience of AA or any other 12-step group? And he said, well, I went to AA once, I saw the God word and ran a mile. And I said, I totally relate to that. That was very much my experience as well. When in years before real recovery, I went to the local drug and alcohol team, and they had the 12 steps on the wall, and I just looked at them and thought, no chance. So I said to this guy, look, do you mind if I ask you a personal question? And he said, sure. And I said, do you have a conscience? And he said, well, of course I do, everybody does. And I said, okay, if we could show you a way to live, guided by your own conscience, in a way that wouldn't be harmful to others, and that also took care of your alcohol or drug problem, would you be up for that? And he said, well, of course I would. And as I'm saying this, I'm thinking, yeah, on its simplest level, this is all it is. We each have, deep down with us, an inner knowing, a conscience. Carl Rogers called it the promptings of our innermost self, or you could call it the authentic self. And this is very different from ego, from the fear-based, rationalizing, justifying mind. This is your true self. And the fear of many people in 12-step recovery is, if I keep adopting these new principles, there's nothing of me going to be left at the end of it. It's actually the other way around. We actually grow in recovery by a process of stripping away the things that have been added on us, and we end up as the authentic self in the middle. And that is the goal of all treatment and recovery, is to remove the blockages, the obstacles, the introjected ideas, the belief systems that don't work, and to find what it is that we do want. And my counselling diploma is in-person centred. And I was very struck and actually changed from, I'd done a couple of years of integrative counselling, which is a little dip into various approaches, to study the Carl Rogers person-centred approach because of what I read, that in his seminal textbook On Becoming a Person, where he talks about having an external locus of evaluation where all the decisions and choices for your life are made from the outside. So the classic example of having an external locus of evaluation is, does my bum look big in this? You're constantly checking, what will others think of me if I do this? How can I please other people? And this is a nightmare, Because if you've got 10 people around you and they all want different things, how can you possibly please them all? I felt torn when I was in full addiction, because on the one hand, I was trying to please other people and please my family and not hurt the people I loved the most. On the other hand, the pull of my addiction and what it did was the exact opposite of that. I was forced to act out extremely selfishly in ways that would hurt the people I loved the most, and there was nothing I could do about it. So we talk about cognitive dissonance, which is kind of like the pain that arises from the gap. Well, my conscience was wanting me to go that way, the illness was wanting me to go that way, and I was in a mess. And if that's your experience true, then welcome. Let's go through some of these videos. I'll try and simplify it. But where I ended up was, I realized all I'd ever wanted to do was be a decent human being. That from a very young age, I hadn't wanted to harm anybody, but I couldn't help it. Because I was pulled and drawn into behaviors and to do things and to make promises I couldn't keep and to do all sorts of things that I had no control over, and it caused a hell of a lot of pain, and it encouraged me to have to escape even more because of the pain I was creating, because of the gap between where my conscience wanted me to be and these behaviors that were driven by my illness. So if that sounds like you, please watch the rest of the videos. So as I said, this is going to be the introductory video to a series of videos in the 12 steps. And there may be another playlist with other videos. Maybe I'll do my story, the full length version. I mean, I can actually tell my story very simply. I grew up uncomfortable. I used a range of distractions. Alcohol or possibly cannabis turned out to be my favourite one. For years I used them without particular consequence. Other people weren't happy, but I managed to ignore them. And then I ended up in a situation where my life had disintegrated and the alcohol and the drugs weren't working anymore, and I had to finally put my hands up and say, okay, I'll come into recovery, reluctantly. And the 12 steps were, I mean, I was so in a state that I wasn't in a position to start looking at different rehabs and deciding which one was best for me. I was just so desperate I just ended up at one, and it happened to be 12 step. So that's the introduction, and as I go through this, I'll probably refer you to a website. My brother-in-law, thanks Rick, is currently building me a website, and the address is franktruth.co.uk, and I've got an email which is franktruth164@gmail.com. Now, if anybody sends me a request for a particular video, I'd be happy to do that. But I've got quite a number on my list of things to do, so give me a chance. I'm sure the website's not quite up yet, but the idea of the website is that you'll be able to go on and download various handouts that go with these workshops. So if you can't quite see the screen or aren't in a position to sort of pause the video and make notes, you'll be able to have these handouts in your hand and maybe print them off, and then you'll have something which will accompany the videos. So that was the original idea of the website, but it's still in the making. So I want you to know that I'm not making this up, that this is not just a personal view of the 12 steps. So what I've done here is I've taken one sentence out of the book Alcoholics Anonymous, which is the book that my rehab uses, which really was the first book or program. It contains the 12 steps. It was the first one that in existence, and other 12-step groups have found that the 12 steps, if you practice them out of that book, it'll work for any addiction. So Cocaine Anonymous, for example, uses the same textbook as AA does, and that's the one that all of our step papers in the rehab are based on. So when people ask me, you know, can you give me one sentence describing how this thing works, I would say it's this sentence from page 64. So it says here, though our decision, so this is actually between step 3 and step 4 in the process. The steps are all laid out page by page. So it's referring to the decision to live from conscience that I've just kind of described. So though our decision was a vital and crucial step, it could have little permanent effect unless at once followed by strenuous effort to face and to be rid of the things in ourselves which had been blocking us. So in a diagram form, these are the 12 steps, essentially. The logic is that deep down within every man, woman and child, every human being, there is a power source. Now you might want to call it the conscience, or you might want to call it something else. I just call it the conscience, my conscience. And it gives me guidance. So all the power I need and all the intuition about how not to harm people is all there. Because when I harm others, I feel guilt and shame, and I don't like those feelings, and that encourages me to try and escape, to need some sort of distraction away from these painful feelings. So in a diagram, if that's, I don't know really how to draw a conscience, but that's what I've come up with. What the 12 steps do is they remove these blockages so that the power can flow. You're guided intuitively by your conscience in a way that's not harmful to others. And what we've found is that if we practice this, we don't have to drink or drug anymore. So how does that sound as a way of living? If that would take away the misery of being pulled in all these different directions, where you're going to strip away all the stuff that doesn't work, and you're going to end up as a true self. And it doesn't matter what your counselor or your sponsor or your mum or your priest or your minister, it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. This is about you being true to yourself and following your own conscience. How does that sound? So the unblocking steps, where we remove these blockages, that is basically contained in steps 4 to 9. And we'll get there as we go through these 12 steps. You'll get a good overview about how this works. Doing the work is a different matter. But the purpose of these videos is really to simplify and to help people feel that actually it's not beyond their grasp. Because like that chap at the rehab, I was the same. As soon as I saw the word God, I just thought, oh right, this is just not for me. And that came from my upbringing, where I had a struggle with religion, and I kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater. Now, we'll get to this. Step 2 is all about recognizing that we do have a conscience, and that is actually what we're asked to do as part of the second step. Step 1 is about the nature of the problem, so that's going to be the next video today. So as an introduction, I hope that was helpful. Thank you.